As the rumble of engines roared through the quiet desert highway, retired Marine Jack Calloway found himself surrounded by a gang of unruly bikers. The leader, Snake, smirked, flicking his cigarette to the ground. "What's in the truck, old man?" he sneered. Jack's weathered hand rested on the latch of the truck bed, his steel-blue eyes scanning the menacing circle. "You really don't want to know," he said, voice calm. What happened next left the bikers paralyzed, staring at Jack in pure disbelief. Jack Calloway sat on the creaky porch of his modest cabin, perched on the edge of the Arizona desert. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dry landscape, painting it in shades of gold and crimson. A slight breeze carried the familiar scent of sagebrush and distant rain. Jack, now well into his 60s, had grown accustomed to this quiet life, a stark contrast to the chaos of his younger years. His days were spent fixing the old truck, tending to his small garden, and feeding Shadow, his loyal German shepherd. It was a life of solitude, but Jack preferred it that way. His years in the Marines had taken their toll, both physically and mentally. After decades of service, the only thing he wanted was peace. That peace, however, was interrupted one evening by the sound of tires crunching over the gravel driveway. Shadow's ears perked up, and the dog stood at attention, growling softly. Jack squinted into the setting sun, recognizing the silhouette of the car as it pulled to a stop. A man stepped out, his figure tall and lean, wearing a well-worn leather jacket. It was Marcus, an old friend from Jack's Black Ops days. Seeing Marcus here after so many years immediately put Jack on edge. He knew Marcus didn't make casual visits. "Long time, Jack," Marcus said, extending a hand. Jack stood, shaking it firmly but cautiously. "Not long enough," Jack replied. "What brings you out here?" Marcus chuckled, but it was devoid of humor. "I need a favor." Jack crossed his arms, leaning against the porch railing. "You don't just need a favor, Marcus. You're here because something's wrong." Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "It's not for me. It's for the country." Jack sighed, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. "Go on." Marcus opened the trunk of his car, revealing a steel case secured with multiple locks. Jack stepped closer, studying it. "What's in the case?" "Let's just say it's something that needs to get to a secure location. You're the only one I trust to make the delivery." Jack frowned. "You've got plenty of people who can do this. Why me?" "Because this isn't just a delivery," Marcus said. "It's a mission, and it has to stay off the books." Jack shook his head. "I'm retired, Marcus. I've done my time." "I know," Marcus said, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. "But this isn't just about you or me. If this falls into the wrong hands, we're looking at a catastrophe." Shadow barked, breaking the silence. Jack looked at his old friend, seeing the desperation in his eyes. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "Fine, I'll do it. But I'm not doing it for you." Marcus smiled faintly. "I knew I could count on you." As Marcus drove away, Jack secured the case in the back of his truck, feeling a sense of foreboding. He didn't know what was in the case, but he knew one thing for certain. It was trouble. The next morning, Jack was on the road, Shadow riding shotgun. The case was strapped down securely in the truck bed, covered by a thick tarp. Jack had been given a specific route to follow, avoiding main highways and sticking to back roads. The instructions were clear: no stops, no questions, no deviations. The journey started uneventfully, the open desert stretching endlessly on either side. Jack kept his eyes on the road, his mind wandering to the years he had spent in combat. He had seen the worst humanity had to offer, and yet here he was, pulled back into the chaos. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Jack noticed a group of motorcycles in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought nothing of it. Bikers were a common sight on these roads, but as the group grew closer, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were following him. Shadow growled softly, sensing Jack's unease. The bikers eventually overtook him, their engines roaring like thunder. They slowed down, surrounding his truck in a tight formation. Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened as one of the bikers motioned for him to pull over. Reluctantly, Jack complied, pulling to the side of the road. The bikers dismounted, their leader, a heavily tattooed man with a shaved head, approaching Jack's window. "Evening, old man," the leader said, his voice dripping with menace. "Nice truck you got there. Mind if we take a look in the back?" Jack stared at him, his face a mask of calm. "I mind." The leader laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Come on now, don't make this difficult." Jack stepped out of the truck standing tall despite the odds stacked against him. "You don't want what's in there." "Oh, I think we do," the leader said, signaling to his crew. Two bikers moved toward the truck bed, but Shadow jumped out, snarling and baring his teeth. The bikers hesitated, clearly not expecting the dog's ferocity. The leader frowned, pulling a knife from his belt. "Call off the mutt, or I'll put it down." Jack's eyes narrowed. "You lay a hand on him, and I'll make sure you regret it." The tension was palpable, the desert air thick with anticipation. Jack knew he was outnumbered, but he also knew that years of training and experience had prepared him for moments like this. He wasn't going down without a fight. The leader of the bikers, Snake, smirked as he surveyed the situation. Shadow's growl echoed through the desert air, a warning no one could ignore. The rest of the gang looked uneasy, shifting on their boots, but Snake wasn't one to back down. He stepped closer to Jack, his knife glinting in the fading sunlight. "You think a dog and an old man can stop us?" Snake asked, his tone dripping with disdain. Jack didn't flinch. Years of training had taught him to stay calm under pressure. "I'm giving you one last chance to walk away," he said evenly. Snake laughed, though nerves flickered in his eyes. "Big talk for someone outnumbered 10-1. Jack adjusted his stance, his hand resting lightly on his belt. He wasn't armed, not in the traditional sense, but he didn't need to be. His mind was his weapon, honed by years of combat experience. He glanced at Shadow, who was poised to strike at the slightest command. "Outnumbered doesn't mean outmatched," Jack said. Snake snapped. "Take him down," he barked at his crew. Two bikers lunged toward Jack. Before they could touch him, Shadow sprang into action. The dog moved like a blur, his jaws clamping down on the arm of the first biker. The man screamed, stumbling back as Shadow turned on the second attacker. Jack moved simultaneously. He grabbed the wrist of another biker reaching for his pocket knife. A quick twist sent the knife clattering to the ground. Jack didn't stop there. He swept the man's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the dirt. The remaining bikers hesitated, unsure whether to attack or retreat. Snake shouted orders, but the chaos was too much. Shadow was a whirlwind of teeth and muscle, and Jack moved with precision, his actions honed by decades of training. "Stop!" Snake yelled, raising his hands to signal retreat. "Everyone back off!" The bikers stepped away, some nursing injuries, others simply shaken. Shadow growled low in his throat, standing protectively in front of Jack. Snake glared at Jack, his knife still in hand. "You think this is over?" Snake hissed. Jack met his gaze. "I know it is." For a moment, Snake seemed ready to attack, but as he glanced at his defeated crew, his shoulders sagged. Muttering curses, he turned and walked back to his bike. The rest of the gang followed, their movements sluggish and defeated. Jack watched them go, his body still tense. Shadow didn't relax until the last bike roared away. Only then did Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good boy," he said, patting Shadow's head. The dog wagged his tail but kept scanning the horizon. Jack climbed into the truck, Shadow hopping into the passenger seat. He checked the steel case, making sure it was still secure. The bikers hadn't gotten near it, but Jack wasn't taking chances. As he started the engine, unease crept in. Snake and his gang might have retreated, but Jack knew their kind. They wouldn't give up so easily. The truck rumbled back onto the road, the setting sun casting long shadows across the desert. Jack kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, scanning for pursuit. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet, but he knew better than to let his guard down. Miles passed in silence, the hum of the engine and Shadow's breathing the only sounds. Jack's mind replayed the encounter. Snake had been too confident, too organized. This wasn't random. It was planned. Someone tipped them off about the case. But who? And why? The questions nagged at him, but there were no easy answers. Jack had agreed to this mission as a favor to Marcus, but now he wondered if he'd been told the full story. Whatever was in that case, it was worth killing for. Jack needed to know what he was dealing with. As the truck crested a hill, Jack spotted a gas station, a small, rundown place with a flickering neon sign. He debated whether to stop, but decided against it. The instructions had been clear. No stops, no questions, no deviations. He had enough gas to reach the next waypoint. Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a distant rumble. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw headlights, multiple sets. His heart sank. The bikers were back. "Shadow," Jack said, his voice low. The dog perked up, sensing the tension. Jack pressed down on the gas pedal, the truck picking up speed. The headlights grew closer, the roar of engines filling the air. Jack clenched the steering wheel. He needed a plan, and fast. The bikers were relentless, their bikes closing in on either side. Jack swerved, trying to keep them at bay. One pulled up alongside the truck, a chain swinging from his hand. Jack jerked the wheel, forcing the biker to veer off course. "Not today," Jack muttered. Shadow barked, his instincts sharp. Jack knew he could count on Shadow to have his back, but this fight required more than brute force. As the bikers surrounded the truck, Jack's mind flashed back to his training. He had survived worse situations. He needed to stay calm and think strategically. The truck hurtled down the road, the chase reaching a fever pitch. Jack's heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting to protect whatever was in that case, and he wasn't about to let it fall into the wrong hands. The truck skidded onto a dirt road, sending up a plume of dust. Jack knew the bikers were close, their roaring engines growing louder. His heart pounded in rhythm with the truck's tires, but his mind remained focused. Shadow barked sharply, sensing the danger. Jack leaned into the wheel, gripping it tightly. The narrow dirt road wasn't forgiving. On either side, jagged rocks jutted out like teeth. The bikers spread out, trying to box him in. One roared up alongside the driver's side, waving a crowbar. Shadow growled as Jack yanked the wheel, slamming the truck into the biker. The man careened into the brush, his bike skidding out of control. "One down," Jack muttered, though the odds were still far from even. The dirt road opened into a dried riverbed, the wide expanse giving Jack a moment to reassess. Snake, at the head of the pack, motioned for his men to flank Jack on both sides. Jack cursed. Whoever hired them wasn't just after the case. They had resources and had done their homework. Jack spotted a narrow path ahead, barely wide enough for the truck. It was risky, but better than staying exposed. "Hold on, Shadow," he warned, pressing down on the gas pedal. The truck bounced violently as it hit the path, tires struggling for traction. Behind him, the bikers hesitated, but Snake pushed them forward. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror. The narrow path funneled the bikers into a single line. It was the opening he needed. Reaching under the seat, Jack grabbed an emergency flare gun. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He rolled down the window, aiming carefully as the first biker drew closer. With a deafening crack, the flare shot out, exploding in a burst of light. The biker swerved, blinded, and tumbled off the path. Snake and the remaining bikers pressed on. The narrow trail climbed steeply, leading to a ridge. If Jack could make it to the top, he might have the high ground. The truck struggled against the incline, the engine groaning. Shadow barked anxiously, his paws braced against the dashboard. Jack glanced at him. "We've been through worse, boy." At the ridge's top, the trail ended abruptly, opening into a plateau. Jack slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt. Dust swirled as Jack jumped out, grabbing a heavy chain from the truck bed. He hooked one end to the steel case, looping the other around the truck's frame. If they wanted the case, they'd have to go through him. The bikers arrived moments later, spreading out across the plateau. Snake dismounted, his boots crunching against the gravel. "End of the line, old man," he said. Jack stood firm, Shadow at his side, the dog's growl low and steady. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Jack said, his voice calm. "Walk away while you still can." Snake laughed. "You keep saying that, but here we are." He motioned to his men, and they advanced. Jack braced himself. The plateau offered no cover, and the bikers had the numbers. But Jack had something they didn't: a lifetime of experience and a dog trained for combat. As the first biker charged, Jack moved with precision. He sidestepped a crowbar swing, using the momentum to throw the man off balance. A swift elbow to the ribs sent him crumpling. Shadow lunged at another attacker, his teeth sinking into the man's arm. Jack grabbed a fallen chain, swinging it in a wide arc. The improvised weapon struck another biker, sending him sprawling. Snake watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. "You've got fight in you, old man," Snake said, "but you're out of time." Jack wiped sweat from his brow, chest heaving. "Time's something I've always made." Snake lunged, his knife flashing. Jack barely dodged, the blade slicing inches from his chest. He countered with a brutal kick to Snake's knee, sending him staggering. Shadow was on him in an instant, growling thunderously. Pinned under Shadow's weight, Snake struggled. "Call him off!" he yelled. Jack crouched down. "Who sent you?" Snake hesitated, sweat glistening on his forehead. "You're already dead, Calloway," he spat. "You just don't know it." Jack motioned to Shadow, who released Snake but remained poised to attack. Snake scrambled to his feet, his confidence shattered. "You've got bigger problems than us," he said, backing toward his bike. "This isn't over." Jack watched as Snake and the remnants of his gang retreated, their bikes disappearing into the distance. He didn't relax until the roar of their engines faded completely. Shadow nudged his hand, and Jack patted the dog's head. He glanced back at the steel case still secured in the truck. What was in it that made it worth so much bloodshed? Jack's gaze lingered on the horizon, a storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. He and Shadow had survived this battle, but something told him it was just the beginning. Jack climbed back into the truck, his hand steady on the wheel. "Let's keep moving," he muttered, the engine roaring to life. Shadow settled in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Whatever was coming, Jack knew they'd have to face it head-on. Jack drove on through the desert night, his mind racing with questions. The steel case in the back of his truck felt heavier with each passing mile, as though it were a magnet for danger. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his ears perked, alert to the slightest sound. The darkness enveloped them, the headlights carving a narrow path through the emptiness. Snake's parting words echoed in Jack's mind. "You're already dead, Calloway. You just don't know it." He glanced at the rearview mirror for the 100th time, scanning for any sign of pursuit. The road stretched behind him, empty and still, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. He had been in too many situations like this to ignore his gut. After another hour of driving, Jack spotted an abandoned service station up ahead. Its rusted gas pumps stood like sentinels under the pale glow of the moon. He debated whether to stop, but decided he needed a moment to regroup. The truck slowed as he pulled into the lot, the gravel crunching under the tires. Jack stepped out, Shadow close at his heels. The air was cool, the silence oppressive. He scanned the area, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The service station was a relic of another time, its windows shattered, the roof sagging. Still, it offered some cover. "Stay close," Jack murmured to Shadow, who responded with a soft growl. Together they approached the truck bed. Jack checked the straps on the steel case, ensuring it was still secure. Satisfied, he leaned against the truck, scanning the horizon. The faint hum of engines reached his ears, growing louder with each second. Jack tensed, his hand resting on the flare gun tucked into his belt. Shadow growled low, his body rigid. The bikers emerged from the darkness, their headlights piercing the gloom. Jack counted at least 6, fewer than before, but still a threat. Snake wasn't with them, but their determined expressions told Jack they weren't here to negotiate. One of the bikers, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, dismounted. "Hand over the case," he said, his voice rough. "No one has to get hurt." Jack straightened, his face unreadable. "That's funny," he said. "That's what the last group said." The biker scowled, his hand hovering near the pistol strapped to his hip. "You're outnumbered, old man. Don't make this harder." Jack's gaze didn't waver. Outnumbered doesn't mean outplayed. The tension crackled like static electricity. Jack's mind raced, calculating his next move. He could see the bikers fanning out, their hands on their weapons. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to finish the job. Before anyone could act, Shadow let out a ferocious bark and lunged. The scarred biker stumbled back, caught off guard. In that split second, Jack grabbed a metal pipe leaning against the service station wall and swung it in a wide arc, connecting with the nearest attacker. The man crumpled to the ground. The rest of the bikers sprang into action, drawing their weapons. Jack ducked behind the truck, using it as cover. Shadow darted between their legs, snapping and snarling, creating chaos. Shots rang out, deafening in the quiet desert night. Jack moved with practiced efficiency, his military training kicking in. He grabbed a biker by the arm and twisted, disarming him with ease. A quick jab to the solar plexus left the man gasping. Another swung a tire iron at Jack, but he sidestepped, driving his elbow into the man's temple. Shadow held his own, his teeth sinking into the arm of a biker who tried to grab him. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. Jack felt a surge of pride. "Good boy," he muttered. The fight was brutal and swift. Within minutes, the bikers lay sprawled on the ground, groaning. Jack stood over them, chest heaving. His flare gun remained untouched. He hadn't needed it. The scarred biker struggled to his feet, clutching his side. "You don't know what's in that case, do you?" he rasped. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Enlighten me." The man shook his head, a grim smile on his face. "You're guarding a ticking time bomb, old man. You think Snake and the rest of us are bad? You have no idea who's really after that thing." Jack stepped closer, his expression hard. "Who?" The biker didn't answer. Instead, he stumbled to his bike, his movements slow. "You'll find out soon enough," he said before revving the engine and disappearing into the night. Jack watched him go, jaw clenched. The remaining bikers scrambled to their feet and followed, their retreat as chaotic as their attack. Jack didn't stop them. He knew they weren't the real threat. As the engines faded, Jack turned back to the truck. The steel case gleamed under the moonlight, unmarked despite the chaos. Jack ran a hand through his hair. Whoever wanted this case wouldn't stop. If anything, the attacks would escalate. He climbed into the truck, Shadow settling into the passenger seat. "Looks like we're in over our heads, boy," Jack said grimly. Shadow whined softly, resting his head on Jack's lap. Jack started the engine, the truck rumbling to life. The road ahead was long and treacherous, but there was no turning back now. Whatever was in that case, it was worth killing for, and Jack wasn't about to let it fall into the wrong hands. The first light of dawn broke over the desert as Jack's truck barreled down a winding road. The steel case in the back felt like a ticking time bomb, and Snake's ominous warning echoed in his mind. Shadow lay curled in the passenger seat, ears twitching with every sound. Jack hadn't slept, his nerves too frayed. Whoever was after the case wasn't giving up, and the bikers had been just the beginning. The road forked ahead, and Jack checked the map Marcus had given him. The next waypoint was a secluded airstrip tucked into the mountains. Marcus claimed it was safe, but nothing about this mission felt secure anymore. Jack turned off the main road onto a dirt path snaking between towering cliffs. The air was cooler here, the shade of the rocks offering brief relief. Shadow sat up, his nose twitching. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked. Shadow let out a low whine, his eyes locked on the cliffs above. Jack caught a glint of light, just before a gunshot shattered the windshield. Instinctively, he ducked, swerving the truck as glass flew everywhere. Shadow barked furiously, hackles raised. More shots echoed through the canyon, ricocheting off the truck. Jack threw the truck into reverse, tires screeching on loose gravel. From the cliffs above, black-clad men with rifles emerged. These weren't bikers. Their movements were coordinated, their aim precise. Jack's stomach sank. Whoever these men were, they were professionals. "Hang on," Jack shouted, slamming the truck back into drive. Bullets pinged off the hood as he sped down the canyon, weaving around fallen rocks and debris. Shadow growled, crouching low in the seat. Jack swerved to avoid a boulder blocking the road, likely part of the ambush. His mind raced. He couldn't outrun them, not in this canyon. He needed a plan. Up ahead, the path narrowed. Jack spotted a cluster of boulders near a bend. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt. "Stay," he ordered Shadow, who reluctantly obeyed. Jack grabbed the flare gun and a crowbar from under the seat before sliding out. The air was thick with dust as he pressed himself against the canyon wall. Footsteps crunched closer. Jack's military instincts kicked in, his breath steady as he prepared to strike. The first man rounded the bend, and Jack swung the crowbar hard into his side. The attacker crumpled, his rifle clattering to the ground. Before the others could react, Jack fired the flare gun. Smoke and blinding light erupted, disorienting the group. Jack grabbed the fallen rifle and ducked behind a boulder as gunfire erupted. Shadow barked from the truck, but Jack motioned for him to stay put. He fired several shots, keeping the attackers pinned. Moving with precision, Jack took out 2 more men. The remaining attackers hesitated, clearly unprepared for this level of resistance. One of the masked men shouted into a radio. Jack's heart sank. Reinforcements. He couldn't stick around. He fired another volley to buy time, then sprinted back to the truck. "Let's go, boy," he yelled, throwing open the door. Shadow leapt inside as Jack hit the gas. The truck roared to life, kicking up dust as it sped away. Bullets pinged off the tailgate, but Jack didn't slow down. The canyon widened, opening into a sprawling valley. Jack pushed the truck to its limits, the engine roaring in protest. Finally, the gunfire faded, and Jack glanced in the rearview mirror. The attackers were gone. For now. Jack pulled into a grove of trees and cut the engine. His hands trembled as he sat back, trying to catch his breath. Shadow nudged Jack's arm with his nose, whining softly. "I'm okay, buddy," Jack muttered, though his voice was shaky. He scratched behind Shadow's ears, drawing comfort from the dog's steady presence. Jack climbed out and checked the steel case. The straps held firm, the case unscathed. He leaned against the truck, his mind racing. Whoever these men were, they weren't amateurs. They were prepared, deadly, and determined. The rifle in Jack's hands felt heavy as he leaned against the boulder. The ambush wasn't random. These men weren't just after the case. They knew its value and were willing to go to extreme lengths to secure it. The sky above was a brilliant shade of blue as the sun climbed higher. Jack pulled out the map and traced the route to the airstrip. It was close, but the ambush had rattled him. If they knew his route, the airstrip might not be as secure as Marcus claimed. Jack crumpled the map in frustration. Second-guessing wouldn't help now. He had to keep moving. As he loaded back into the truck, Jack glanced at Shadow. "It's just us now, boy," he said softly. Shadow whined again, his nose resting on Jack's lap. "But we'll see this through." The rising sun bathed the valley in golden light as Jack climbed back into the truck. Shadow settled into the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Jack gripped the steering wheel tightly. Whatever was in that case, it wasn't just worth dying for. It was worth killing for. and Jack had a sinking feeling the worst was yet to come. The small airstrip appeared on the horizon, a faint scar against the rugged mountains. Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel, Shadow sitting alert in the passenger seat. The truck rattled along the uneven dirt road as Jack's eyes scanned for any signs of movement. His gut told him this wouldn't be as straightforward as Marcus had promised. As Jack approached the airstrip, the dilapidated hangar came into view, its rusted roof shimmering under the midday sun. A small plane sat on the tarmac, its propeller motionless. A man in aviator sunglasses leaned against the wing, arms crossed. Jack recognized him. Evan "Hawk" Hawthorne, an old comrade from his Black Ops days. Jack parked the truck and stepped out, Shadow at his side. Hawk straightened, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Jack Calloway," Hawk said. "Been a long time." Jack gave a curt nod. "Marcus sent you?" Hawk smirked. "Said you'd need backup." He gestured to the hills surrounding the airstrip. Jack squinted and spotted glints of light. Snipers. "They're mine," Hawk added. "Let's hope they're enough." Jack unfastened the steel case from the truck bed. Shadow growled softly, his ears swiveling. Jack paused, his senses prickling. The air felt heavy, charged. A distant rumble reached his ears. Hawk stiffened, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "We've got company." A convoy of black SUVs crested the hill, their engines roaring. The vehicles spread out as they approached, dust billowing behind them. Shadow barked, hackles raised. Jack's grip on the crowbar tightened. "Get the plane ready," he said. Hawk hesitated, then nodded, sprinting toward the hangar. The SUVs screeched to a halt, and armed men spilled out with military precision. Jack recognized the emblem on their uniforms, a black eagle clutching a lightning bolt. Black Talon, a shadowy paramilitary group he hadn't encountered in years. Their leader stepped forward, a scar cutting across his cheek. "Calloway, that case doesn't belong to you." Jack stepped forward, his expression calm. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." The leader's lips curled into a cold smile. "Hand it over and you walk away." Jack's eyes flicked to the hills. Hawk's snipers were in position. "I've heard that before," Jack said. "Didn't work out for the last guys." The leader's smile vanished. "Your call." He raised his hand, and his men opened fire. Hawk's snipers retaliated, bullets tearing into Black Talon's ranks. Jack moved swiftly, using the truck as cover. He swung the crowbar with brutal efficiency, disarming one attacker before slamming it into another's chest. Shadow barked from the plane, his sharp eyes tracking the chaos. The airstrip became a battlefield. Jack grabbed a discarded rifle, firing with precision. Hawk emerged from the hangar, rifle in hand, covering Jack as he fought his way toward the plane. The attackers were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. "Hawk!" Jack shouted. "Get that plane in the air!" Hawk nodded, sprinting to the cockpit. The plane's engine roared to life, its propellers spinning furiously. Shadow barked again, his tail wagging as the plane began to move. The leader of Black Talon blocked Jack's path, his scarred face twisted in a snarl. The two collided, grappling for control. Jack's strength faltered, but his resolve didn't. With a final surge, he drove his elbow into the man's face, sending him sprawling. Jack sprinted for the plane as it gained speed. Hawk shouted, "Jump, Jack!" With every ounce of strength, Jack leapt, grabbing the open cargo door. Shadow helped pull him inside, and Jack collapsed onto the floor, gasping. Hawk laughed over the roar of the engine. "Still got it, Calloway." Jack sat up, his eyes on the shrinking airstrip. Black Talon's leader stood motionless, his face a mask of rage. As the plane leveled out, Jack turned to the steel case, now secured in the cargo hold. He looked at Hawk, his expression grim. "Do you know what's in there?" Hawk shook his head. "Classified. Marcus wouldn't say." Jack's hand rested on the case. Whatever was inside, it had cost lives, and it wasn't over. He looked at Shadow, who wagged his tail, ready for the next challenge. "No turning back now," Jack muttered. His fingers lingered on the case as he thought about the bloodshed it had caused. Hawk glanced back. "Marcus mentioned the next location might be hotter than this. You sure you want to keep going?" Jack's expression hardened. "I don't have a choice. He owes me answers, and I'm getting them." The plane climbed higher, the hum of its engine steady against the backdrop of endless sky. Shadow rested his head on Jack's lap, his body finally relaxing. Jack glanced at Hawk, his voice low. "Whatever happens next, we see this through." Hawk nodded, his lips set in a grim line. "You always did pick the hard fights, Calloway." The horizon stretched endlessly ahead as the plane roared forward. Whatever lay beyond, Jack was ready. The chaos they left behind was nothing compared to what was coming, and Jack Calloway would face it head-on. The plane soared into the horizon, carrying the weight of unanswered questions and the burden of what lay ahead.